Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on this video. In this video, I want to talk about why I use Linux, and specifically why I have chosen Linux Mint to be the distro not only that I use at home, but I also offer support to others who want to get into running Linux Mint. I also want to restate some things that I have said in other videos, but I think when you're in a growing community, like the Easy Linux community is, it's a good idea every now and again to restate your position on different things, just to make it perfectly clear what you're doing and why you're doing it. So we'll start out here with this lovely screenshot that was taken on January the 15th, 2013. This was my main desktop operating system at that time. And it's Windows 7, and on the screen you see that I have Windows XP running in a virtual machine. And between the two of these systems, I got all of my work done. I have always been interested in Linux, going way back to like when I first heard of Linux, which would have been sometime in the late 90s. And so therefore I have always had it going somewhere, at least on a machine or in a virtual machine, for the last 10 years. When this shot was taken, I had a laptop computer that was running Ubuntu 12.04, which was my secondary machine. And then on my main machine, I had Windows XP, and I also had Linux Mint 9 in a virtual machine. So I was always playing around with Linux, but I hadn't completely let go of the Windows operating system as of this time. So let's fast forward to today. This is my current main system, which runs Linux Mint, and I have a virtual machine running Ubuntu here, just to show you that I still do things in virtual machines. I have several different virtual machines set up. But one thing I do not do anymore is use any Microsoft product of any kind. I came to a decision in 2014 that I was going to completely get off of the Microsoft merry-go-round. I was no longer going to use their products, nor was I going to support their products in any way, because up until that time, I offered freelance tech support, and I worked on people's computers to make a little extra money. And a lot of the jobs that I did at that time was to go in and fix Windows, which involved cleaning out viruses, reinstalling things, whatever it took to get the system up and running. And at that point, I stopped doing that as well. I said, I'm not going to work on Windows at all. Totally, completely done with it. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and I could probably go on for about 2 hours about why I don't like Windows, but I want to focus on one thing, one aspect of the Microsoft experience. And what I want to show you is the Microsoft EULA. That's an end user license agreement. If you have Windows on your computer, even if you went down to the store and bought a computer with Windows on it, at some point during the activation process, you have to agree to these terms and conditions to use the Windows operating system. These terms and conditions lay out quite specifically what Microsoft expects from you and what they expect to be able to do with your computer. The first thing in here that is of note is the fact that if you buy a copy of Windows and you put it on your computer, you don't own it. You are leasing it. Microsoft maintains control over that copy of Windows and anything you do with it. It is clearly stated in their end user license agreement. Microsoft reserves the right at any time to get into your computer, change anything about your computer. They also reserve the right to look at any data that is on that computer and do with it what they will. It is in the license agreement. To me, that is an invasion of privacy. And I don't need some mega corporation that has access to my personal computing day to day. Microsoft used to be a pretty cool company. I was a Windows user from Windows 3 all the way up to Windows 7. And I used to work in radio and television stations, and I maintained automation systems and servers that ran on Windows. I was very well versed in the system. But something happened about 2007 with Microsoft. They decided, for whatever reason, that they were no longer going to be listening to their users. They didn't care about what people wanted. It turned into a situation where Microsoft wanted to push their agenda on their users. And that started with Windows Vista, which was a huge change and was incompatible with Windows XP machines. And it has steadily gotten worse over the years. And if you install Windows 10, or if you buy a computer with Windows 10 on it, you have very little control over what that machine does. Microsoft is siphoning your data off. They are looking in your system. There are backdoors that are available in the Microsoft system that allow not only Microsoft to get in, but also allow other attackers to get into the system. Microsoft refuses to close these backdoors and make it more secure because they want control over your system. And then there are those who will say, well, I paid good money for antivirus. I have McAfee. I have any number of different third-party commercial antivirus software that is supposed to keep me safe. It won't, and it doesn't. Experts say that that stuff is only about 20% effective. And what it really is something called security theater, which means that it looks like it's doing something, but it really isn't. Now, I'm not saying that every company that works on antivirus are a bunch of crooks and they're just trying to rip you off. What I'm saying is that Microsoft could very well close the holes in the system and make it so you didn't need any antivirus protection at all, but they refuse to do that. And that has been proven over and over and over again. If you go through this EULA, you'll find that it is very long. And not only that, it refers to several other documents. And if you were going to take the time to read it, it would work out to be hundreds of pages of documentation. I think the last number I heard was like 150, and that's ever changing because they add more to this, references to other documents. It's a lot of legalese and it's a lot of mumbo jumbo, which basically says that if something bad happens to you because your data gets hacked by some attacker and they put ransomware on your computer, Microsoft is not at fault. They take no responsibility for that. And then on top of that, add the privacy issues that Microsoft is actually looking at your data. They are looking in your system. They know what you're doing with it. They have access to it. On top of that, in Windows 10, they are actually sending ads down into your computer that show up when you're trying to do things, even in the file manager. And you cannot turn these ads off. As a matter of fact, there are those out there that will tell you that you can close all of this down, you can turn it off. Microsoft has proven again and again and again that they don't care about the user's will. They will send down updates that turn things on that you don't want running. They have done it over and over and over again. I personally find this impossible to live with. I am not going to use a system that I could get up one morning and turn on my computer and find that my data has been compromised, that my identity has been stolen, or that my desktop environment has been changed against my will. I'm just not going to use a system like this. No way. So there is an alternative to this out there. You don't have to deal with Microsoft. You don't have to pay money to have a system that then forces ads on you. You do not have to worry about whether your system is going to be hacked and whether you're going to lose your identity, or whether some three-letter agency is going to come after you because they subpoenaed records from Microsoft of data that they took from you. You don't have to worry about this because there is an alternative. Let's talk about this license right here. This is the GNU General Public License. And this is the license that most programs that are included in a Linux distribution are distributed under. The technical name for the Linux operating system is the GNU/Linux system, because when Linus Torvalds wrote the Linux kernel, from which the system gets its name, it was included in another operating system that was being developed at the time called GNU. And so Linus Torvalds, when he wrote his kernel application, he distributed under the GNU General Public License, and it could be integrated with all of the then existing GNU utilities, and you could come up with a full operating system that worked on your computer. And the reason why I call Linux Linux, and most people do, is because it's a convenient shorthand. The truth of the matter is that a Linux distribution, there are so many different organizations that are contributing to it that it's kind of ridiculous to have a name that lists all of them. But GNU definitely played a big part in what we have today, what we call Linux. So I want to give credit where credit is due. This license basically says that you can use this software any way that you want to. You can freely distribute this software. You can modify this software. If you are a programmer and you can read code, you can go in and you can change that piece of software to do whatever you want it to do, as long as you give credit to the original author. You can take a piece of software and you can turn it into something else, and you can change the name, and that becomes what is known as a fork. And that's perfectly all right in the Linux world. If you did the things that the GNU public license allowed you to do with a Microsoft product or an Apple product or any other proprietary software, you would be put in jail. It would be considered piracy. In the free software world, sharing is encouraged. We want you to redistribute whatever you have. We want you to change it. We want you to make it your own and make it available to other people. And that concept is something that is scary to the large proprietary software providers, all of them. They don't quite understand how this works. And they don't see how people could possibly make money off of a situation where you're giving things away. If you look at companies like Red Hat and Canonical that distribute Linux software, they make money. And they do it by selling support for the software. A piece of software that falls under the GNU General Public License can be sold. You can put a price tag on it. That's not a problem. Many people in the community distribute their software freely, and they want you to donate to the project. That's fine. But there is nothing in this license that says that you cannot sell it. You can put a price tag on it. What you cannot do is lock down the source code. This is the code that makes up the application. And that has to be freely available somewhere so that people can look at it, they can vet it, they can modify it if they want to, they can do anything they want with that code. What you do with the compiled program is entirely up to you. Having all those eyes on the code is one of the things that makes free software more secure than proprietary software. When you get a piece of software from a proprietary provider, which means that they do not give you access to the source code, they do not let you see what went into that program, and decompiling that program is a breach of license which could get you in trouble, you don't know what's in it. And I'm not a programmer. I can't look at code and say, is this good, is this bad? I can't personally do that. But I do know people that can. And if they can't see that original code, that piece of software could be doing anything. And you have no clue what it's doing. And so with GNU General Public Licensed software, you really do, you get a little extra measure of protection, because once this is posted where everybody in the community can see it, everybody can look at it. Anybody that would try and sneak malware or a virus or something into it, they're going to get called on real fast. That piece of software is going to get a bad name and it's going to go away. Now, this doesn't mean that that piece of software is going to be useful. It doesn't mean that it's going to do exactly what you need it to do. It doesn't mean that it's going to be good software. It just means that it's safe, that it's not going to put you in harm's way. And that's a little bit of extra protection when you're using free software. Because of the GNU General Public License, we have many different distributions of Linux available to us these days. There's something in the neighborhood of 1,000 at this point. These are visions of different people and organizations of what an operating system should be. And that's part of the beauty of Linux, is the choice. One of the things I hear people say all the time in comments is, why don't they just make one big Linux? Well, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier when you talk about how Microsoft wants you to use your computer their way, and they want access to what you do. They want you to have one desktop. They want you to have the Windows 10, Windows 8 experience, whatever that is. Same thing goes for Apple computers, Mac OS. It's their desktop. You can't change it. You can't do a whole lot with it. Yes, you can theme it. You can change little things, but you can't put another desktop on the machine. In Linux, there's literally dozens of desktop environments you can choose. You can have any desktop experience that you want to. And so that is why we have so much choice within the community. But all of these systems that you see here listed on DistroWatch, they have one thing in common. They use the Linux kernel and they use a basic set of GNU tools. So that is why the technical name for this operating system is GNU Linux, because that forms the core, it forms the base. Distributions can be very radically different in how they work, and they can be very different in how they are used by the end user. But one thing remains the same. Those basic Linux things don't change, which is really cool. So if you take the time to learn the basics of Linux, you can sit down in front of any distribution of Linux that's designed for any task, any job, any kind of user, and you can learn your way around. It doesn't take long at all. So why have I settled on Linux Mint to be the distribution that not only I use at home, but also I offer to people who are coming to Linux for the first time? There's a lot of reasons for this. First of all, Linux Mint has proven itself to be one of the most stable distributions of Linux there is. This distribution of Linux is based on Ubuntu, or you can also get a version that's based directly on Debian. Now, if you don't know what that means because you're brand new, well, let me explain that a little bit. Remember we were talking about the GNU public license and how you could base things off of other people's work and come up with something new? In the Linux world, you can take what one group has done, and then you can use bits and pieces from that to create your own distribution. So in the case of Ubuntu, Ubuntu is based on Debian, which is one of the oldest distributions of Linux. Debian is still alive and kicking. They just came out with a new version like 2 days ago. Ubuntu uses a lot of the Debian pieces to create their own operating system. And Linux Mint, in turn, adds to Ubuntu, and unlike many other distributions of Linux that are based on Ubuntu, Linux Mint takes it a step further because they actually develop alongside Ubuntu. At this point in time, Linux Mint is more of its own distribution than it is based on Ubuntu. It has its own tools, its own desktop environment, everything with it. It's basically now Ubuntu compatible, which means that you have access to all of that great Ubuntu software, and that's how it works. Linux Mint is different from other distributions of Linux because they want people to have a stable work environment. It is designed for people who want a stable workstation to do basic computer tasks on. It is not a distribution of Linux that is designed for people who want to be on the bleeding edge, although it's actually more up to date than some of the other more technical distros are in a lot of ways. It is designed for people who are using a computer mainly at home, although you can use Linux Mint in an office. And Linux Mint comes installed with everything you need to get started. They really are very passionate about making it so that when you install this on your system, you get a good user experience right out of the box. They work really hard on polish, that everything works the way it's supposed to, that you're not going to run into issues and bugs, and you're not going to have to worry about things like going to find drivers. You're not going to have to worry about finding codecs to play back multimedia. It is all included with Linux Mint when you install the system. So you get a good basic working system, and then you can build on that from there. A lot of people that start out using Linux Mint find after 6 months, a year, or something like that, that they want to get into something a little more cutting edge. Maybe you want to go to Ubuntu. Maybe you want to go to Fedora. Maybe you want to get into Arch Linux, which is less new user friendly, but certainly very powerful. So it's a great place to start, and it's the operating system that I 9 times out of 10 recommend to people who come to me and ask, what is the best Linux distro to get started with? It is an awesome system, and it works very, very well. So this is why I have pretty much chosen Linux Mint as not only my daily computer system, but most of the clients that I work with through Easy Linux. Most of the people that I support directly, they're running Linux Mint. Now, you might go back and look at my videos and you might say, well, this guy's a distro hopper. Every time I turn around, he's looking at something new. He's trying something different. Well, I do that because I want to know what's going on. And I also do that because distro reviews are very popular videos. People want to see what the latest and greatest looks like. And I put my opinion out there. I don't really do distro reviews. I do an opinion of, or I do a look at, which means I'm going to load it up. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to tell you what my thoughts are. If I was going to do a real distro review for everything that I looked at, then I would end up having 40 computers running different systems all the time, because I think to do a really good review, what you need to do is install the system and use it daily for a month to really get a feel for it if you're going to do a review. So I don't do reviews. I do a look at. And so every now and again, we talk about things that come along. But the truth of the matter is that for the last, I'd say, 3 years now, the distribution that I have used on my computers here in the house has been Linux Mint. I have several other machines that the family uses, and they're all running Linux Mint, and everybody's happy with it. I also have my mom using Linux Mint. She loves it. She ran Windows 7 for a long, long time, and when Windows 7 broke itself, I put her on Linux Mint, and she has been very happy. Not only that, she's actually started to do more with her computer than she ever did with Windows 7. She's not a computer guru. She's not a genius. I asked her, I said, why do you do all this stuff now that you didn't do with Windows 7? And she told me, I was afraid of breaking it. I'm not afraid of breaking Linux Mint. I can push buttons and see what happens. So yes, Linux Mint is the distro that I recommend to other people and that I use myself, because they tend to concentrate on that end user experience. And Linux Mint tries to be familiar with the Cinnamon desktop and the way they lay out other desktop environments, but they don't try and emulate Windows. They're not trying to look like Windows 10. They're not trying to look like Windows or even Mac. They don't do it. We have our own thing. Now, it's a familiar layout because you have the panel at the bottom and you have the icons on the desktop and stuff that people who have grown up using Windows are used to, but they don't try and be Windows. So it's a nice go-between for people who are starting with Linux. You wouldn't want to put somebody who first started out with Linux on a tiling window manager. It's just not a good idea, right? Because they're going to be completely like a fish out of water. And a lot of people who come to Linux, they see things like the current GNOME 3 desktop and they go, I don't know whether I can use that or not. So Linux Mint with the Cinnamon desktop and the way they lay out things like KDE and other desktop environments that are available on Mint. They really try and make it familiar and make it easy to use. And they also have created a lot of their own applications to keep a more traditional user interface. The GNOME project, for instance, they've upgraded a lot of their applications to have a way oversimplified different interface. So Linux Mint has actually forked several of those applications, and they call them XApps, and they are essentially more traditional applications for users who have been using the Windows world and more traditional systems for a long, long time. Linux Mint is not perfect. No way is it perfect. There are flaws in the system. There are problems. There are some things that the Mint project does that I don't particularly agree with. I'll give you a for instance. Linux Mint ships with a certain option turned off in Synaptic Package Manager that doesn't consider recommended software as being a dependency, so therefore sometimes people will install software on Linux Mint either through a terminal or through the software applications, and they will find that features are missing, and that's because that one little setting is not turned on. I really wish Linux Mint would just ship with that turned on, because that is what Debian does, that's what Ubuntu does. Now, why they do that, I don't know. So that's an example of some things in there that need to be addressed at install, and this is usually what I work with people on, is just helping them get it installed on their computer and then helping them get it set up to where it becomes usable. That's what I work with people through Easy Linux about. So a couple words before we wrap this little thing up about Easy Linux. Easy Linux is a project that I started in late 2014 where I was reaching out to people to help them get started with Linux. My decision to switch to Linux full-time was motivated by the fact that I was very upset by what was going on with the Windows world. And I was seeing more and more and more that Microsoft was monopolizing, and basically they were using their users for their own personal gain. And there's a lot of people out there that have had major issues working with Windows that feel the same way. So I wanted to reach out to people and help them get started with Linux. And I took some classes to get myself prepared so I would know what I was talking about, and it has been a wonderful experience. Now, when I first started doing this, I offered support for Ubuntu, I offered support for Linux Lite, I offered support for many other distributions of Linux. These days, it's Linux Mint, and it's not because I decided that I didn't want to offer support for other systems. It's because the people that have come to me over the last year and a half, 2 years, have invariably asked for help with Linux Mint. So that is another reason why I have shifted my focus 100% to Linux Mint, because it is what people are asking for help with. So it works out really well. I'm a Linux Mint user, have been probably since like Linux Mint, I don't know, 3 or 4, and so therefore it works out really well. The Easy Linux project is a way to help people transition from what they're ordinarily used to working with, like Windows, or I've even worked with Mac users, although I'm not a big Mac person myself, never have been. And it's just to help to smooth out the bumps, and whether that's helping somebody by sending them emails or providing a video that shows an installation process or any number of things, that's how it works. I do limited one-on-one support with people. I actually have not done that in quite some time lately, because I've essentially given away the store. If you watch the videos on this channel, you're going to learn how to do it yourself. Now, the one thing that has changed in the last 3 years since I started Easy Linux is that when I first started out, it was pretty common for folks to go down to a big box store and buy a brand new computer off the shelf, you know, like a really good price, $300-400 laptop, and then put Linux on it. The way that computers are being shipped today, and some of the things that Microsoft themselves have implemented, make it very difficult to go out and buy a machine that's brand new that is designed to run Linux, or rather run Windows, and then just install Linux on it like no big deal. It is possible to dual boot Linux and Windows 10. However, most of the people that I have worked with that have attempted to do that have gotten bitten by that, and Microsoft essentially wipes out their Linux install on a regular basis. Microsoft, while professing to love Linux, has also taken very quiet steps in the background to make it very difficult for anybody to install Linux on a machine that was designed to run Windows. There is a system called Secure Boot that has come into popularity in the last 5 years or so, where the operating system itself and the computer are linked by security keys. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a really good idea, but one of the byproducts of that is the fact that Microsoft and the computer vendors, the people who build the machines, who implement this, are making it almost impossible to run anything else but Windows. And that sounds like, well, that's awful. You can't install Linux on Windows x86 hardware. What's the deal with that? One of the other things that's happened in the last 3 to 5 years is the rise of companies that offer machines that are specifically designed to run Linux, that have the right hardware and the right drivers and come preloaded with Linux. And there are several companies doing this. The two that come to mind right off the top of my head that are really putting a big effort into this are System 76 in the US and also Dell Computers. These companies sell computers all over the world that come installed with Ubuntu. If you don't like Ubuntu, then you don't have to run it, because those companies also offer support to help you install any distribution of Linux you want on that machine. They're selling you hardware. They're not selling you an operating system. When you go and buy a machine that comes preloaded with Windows, you're paying for Windows. You're paying, part of the price is the license to run Windows. So in this day and age, going out and buying a new computer off the shelf and then trying to put Linux on it and paying extra on top of that for a Windows license that you might not use doesn't make a lot of sense. So as Easy Linux has evolved, I am more and more, when people come to me and say, what computer should I get for Linux, I am pointing them in the direction of buying a machine that already comes preloaded. Now, if you know how to do it, you can build your own computer to run Linux, of course, if you are geeky and technical. But people like that ordinarily are not who I work with. If you know how to build your own computer, you probably won't have too much trouble getting Linux installed and configured. I work with people who are really novices that don't know a whole lot. Now, if you can't afford a new computer, either from System 76 or anywhere, there's another option, and that is to buy a used machine. And eBay and Craigslist are full of machines that are 3 to 5 years old that are in good working order. Many refurbished machines are offered, especially corporate leases, where a company has leased machines for a while and then given them back to who they've leased them from, and then they get on the market and they're sold refurbished new, or refurbished used rather. Those machines are great for Linux. A lot of HPs and Dells out there like that. So all in all, I am very optimistic about the future of Linux. I think Linux is going to continue to be a viable alternative to proprietary software and proprietary systems that in the end don't respect the user, because that's what it really comes down to for me. I would like to see more people use Linux. Part of the reason why I do this is to educate, because Linux is not a product. It's not something that's put out by a corporation, although there are corporations that sell Linux. At its heart, Linux is a community. It's you and it's me working together to build a computing platform that everybody can participate in. And Linux does not exclude you for your knowledge level, your economics, what country you live in, what religion you are, what your race is. It makes no difference. The Linux community is diverse. People from all over the world contribute to Linux. And I think that's a truly wonderful thing going on in the world today, when there's so much division and there's so much suspicion of other people because they're different from you. Isn't it nice to have a common ground where people from all over the world can come together and work together that doesn't have anything to do with politics, or doesn't have anything to do with whatever divides people? Linux unites people. So no matter what the corporations do, it's never going to go away. Even if Ubuntu stopped existing tomorrow, Linux Mint would go on because they have an edition of it that's based on Debian. That's true of pretty much any Linux distribution. While Linux distributions tend to be interdependent of one another, they are independent enough to be able to survive on their own. And in some form and some way, this will continue. So it's not really that big a deal for me. I don't think that it's not a big deal for me like Linux needs to, stomp Windows into the ground and we need to get rid of all proprietary systems. But at the same time, I think it would be better if Linux would gain more mainstream acceptance. And the way to do that is to get people using Linux and to make sure that they have a very good, satisfying experience up front. And for those people who go around the internet posting how Linux is unstable, Linux sucks, Linux doesn't work, whatever they put up, I would have to tell you that my experience over the last 2 or 3 years working with people from around the world and getting them started tells me the opposite. Linux does require learning. Linux is very different, but it's very rewarding because the more you know, the more you're empowered. And the more empowered you are, the more you can take over your own internet computing experience and do it the way you want to do it and not have to do it the way Apple wants you to do it or Microsoft wants you to do it or Google wants you to do it or any of these other companies that offer operating systems for computers, smartphones, and tablets. Linux allows you to really have control over what you're doing, and that's what's important to me. It is a community that respects the user. A corporation does not respect the user. What they're looking for is how they can get more money from their users and how they can get the information that they can sell about their users to make more money. That's their prime motivation, is profit. Linux does not have a profit motive. Linux exists to help other people. So anyway, thank you for watching this video. I just wanted to put that out there because just some of the conversations that I've had with folks lately, and there are many folks who are kind of wondering about the future of Linux, and the truth of the matter is I think the future of Linux is very bright. Thank you for watching. Check out Easy Linux on the web. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook. And also check out freedompenguin.com for lots of cool stories about Linux. We'll do it again soon.